On a crisp autumn evening in Boston, the grand lobby of Whitmore Conservatory gleamed under the golden glow of chandeliers. The marble floors carried the soft echo of hurried footsteps as guests in evening gowns and tailored suits swept past the check-in desk toward the great hall. Amid the swirl of elegance, a solitary figure worked quietly near the stage, a man in a faded maintenance jacket polishing the legs of a concert piano as though it were an antique jewel. His name was Daniel Reeves, a 39-year-old single father and former Marine. To the patrons drifting by with champagne flutes in hand, he was invisible, just another custodian doing his job. But to Daniel, the rich, resonant body of that Steinway wasn't just wood and strings, it was a living memory of who he used to be. At home, his 8-year-old daughter Sophie often asked him to play like he once did before life's storms had stolen the music from his hands. He always smiled, always promised someday. But tonight, under the glittering chandeliers and the low hum of a gathering crowd, that someday might arrive sooner than expected. Because in this room, unbeknownst to him, waited a moment that would strip away the labels of janitor or veteran and reveal the artist he had buried long ago. And it would begin not with applause, but with a cutting remark from a man who thought himself untouchable. Daniel had just finished buffing the last smudge from the piano's glossy lid when a sharp voice cut through the ambient chatter. "Careful with that, soldier," the man drawled, his words dipped in mockery. Standing a few feet away was Leonard Price, a celebrated music critic whose tailored tuxedo seemed to carry as much ego as it did fabric. His gaze swept over Daniel like a man appraising a piece of furniture. "That instrument has more value in a single key than you've likely seen in your life. Best not to leave your fingerprints where they don't belong." Daniel straightened, meeting Leonard's smirk, with a calm, unflinching stare. "This instrument," he said quietly, "is a 1925 Steinway model crafted in Hamburg spruce. Soundboard ivory keys restored about 10 years ago. And if you listen closely..." He tapped a single note, letting it ring into the hall's rafters. "You'll hear why the action still feels like silk." A few nearby guests paused, their curiosity piqued by the unexpected confidence in the janitor's voice. Leonard blinked, caught off guard. "You play?" he asked, his tone dripping skepticism. Daniel didn't flinch. "Used to. A long time ago." From across the room, Caroline Mercer, the poised CEO hosting tonight's gala, had been watching. She recognized Leonard's tendency to belittle anyone he deemed beneath him. But there was something in Daniel's voice, a quiet authority, that made her lean forward. Leonard gave a dismissive chuckle. "Well, isn't that quaint? Perhaps you should stick to mops and buckets, leave the music to those who understand it." His words meant to sting instead planted a seed. Daniel didn't show it, but inside a part of him stirred the same part that used to sit at a piano until his fingertips ached chasing a perfect chord that could outlast the silence. Caroline Mercer had a gift for reading people, a skill sharpened over decades in boardrooms and behind velvet curtains at events like this. As she moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, her attention kept drifting back to the man in the maintenance jacket who had just silenced Leonard Price with nothing more than a few well-chosen words. She approached during the lull in the noise, her voice warm but measured. "That was quite the defense of our Steinway," she said, glancing at the piano. Daniel looked up from gathering his tools, unsure whether she was teasing or sincere. "Just telling the truth," he replied. "Seems like fewer people are interested in that these days." Caroline smiled faintly, sensing the layers beneath his guarded tone. "You know," she began, "I used to play too. Spent half my childhood at a piano bench dreaming I'd perform at Carnegie Hall one day. But the pressure, the criticism it takes, the joy out of the notes if you let it." Daniel's eyes softened. "Yeah, I know that feeling." He didn't elaborate, but she caught the flicker of something unspoken, a memory too heavy to set down in public. She decided not to push. Instead, she nodded toward the hall where the gala would soon begin. If you're staying to hear the performance, I suspect you might hear a few pieces you've played yourself. He gave a half smile. We'll see. It's been a long time. As Caroline walked away to greet another guest, she couldn't shake the thought that Daniel Reeves was more than the sum of his job title. There was a precision in the way he handled the piano, but also a tenderness like a man caring for something sacred. She didn't know it yet, but before the night was over, those hands would do far more than polish wood and ivory. They would fill the air with music that no one in that hall would forget. The gala was in full swing when Leonard Price spotted Daniel again, this time lingering near the edge of the great hall. The room shimmered with crystal light, the air thick with perfume, and the low murmur of wealthy patrons awaiting the evening's headliner. Leonard, clearly enjoying the captive audience around him, raised his glass and called out just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Mr. Reeves," he said, drawing out the name like a schoolmaster calling on an unprepared student, "since you're so knowledgeable about our beloved Steinway, perhaps you'd care to demonstrate." A few. In the crowd chuckled. Others glanced between them, sensing the setup. Daniel's first instinct was to refuse. This wasn't his stage anymore, and certainly not his crowd. "I'm just here to work," he replied evenly. Leonard pressed on, smirking. Surely a man who speaks so reverently about the instrument can manage a few notes. Or are those just words for polishing daydreams? The comment landed like a gauntlet at Daniel's feet. He looked toward the piano, its lacquered body gleaming under the spotlight, and then at Leonard, whose smug expression dared him to step forward. The hall seemed to quiet, the clink of glasses fading into a taut silence. Slowly, Daniel walked to the bench. He sat adjusted the height with practiced hands and rested his fingers lightly on the keys. The murmurs stilled. Without another glance at Leonard, he began to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1A, choice both daring and unorthodox for the moment. The opening notes floated into the rafters warm and deliberate, before swelling into the turbulent runs and aching chords that demanded both technical mastery and raw emotion. Each phrase carried the weight of years-lost love and the resilience of a man who had learned to live with both. Within minutes, the smirk had drained from Leonard's face, replaced by something almost like awe. By the time the final chord dissolved into silence, no one was laughing. For a long, breathless moment, the hall remained still. It was as if Daniel's final chord had frozen everyone in place. Hands paused halfway to wine glasses, conversations suspended mid-sentence. Then, like a dam breaking the room, erupted in applause. It wasn't the polite, perfunctory clapping of a gala audience. It was loud, sustained, and genuine. People rose to their feet, some leaning forward as if to see the man more clearly, as though they had missed something important all night. Caroline Mercer stood near the back, her eyes glistening in the soft light. She had been in countless concert halls, heard virtuosos play flawless renditions of Chopin, yet there was something about Daniel's performance that went beyond technical brilliance. It was unfiltered pain and beauty, woven together in a way only someone who had lived both could manage. At the piano, Daniel kept his head bowed for a beat longer, letting the applause wash over him without quite meeting it. He wasn't playing for these people. He was playing for Sophie, for the version of himself who once believed music could heal anything, and for the years when he couldn't bear to touch the keys at all. From his table, Leonard Price shifted uncomfortably. His earlier bravado melted into silence. He gave a stiff nod toward Daniel, but it was clear he had no clever remark to follow. The critic had been outplayed, literally. When Daniel finally stood, he didn't offer a bow or flourish. He simply stepped away from the bench, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips, and returned to his quiet place at the edge of the room. But now the eyes that followed him weren't dismissive. They were curious, respectful. Somewhere in the crowd, Sophie beamed up at him from her seat, her small hands clapping harder than anyone else's. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt the music in his bones again, not as a memory, but as something alive calling him forward. After the applause faded and the crowd returned to their conversations, Caroline sought Daniel out. She found him near the service corridor, packing away his cleaning supplies, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "You shouldn't disappear like that," she said, her voice carrying both admiration and intent. "You just silenced a room full of people who thought they'd seen everything. That's not something you hide." Daniel gave a modest shrug. "I'm not looking for a spotlight. I just couldn't let him talk like that in front of the piano." Carolyn studied him for a moment, then smiled knowingly. "You know, there are schools, community centers, even veteran programs that would give anything for someone like you to teach to perform, to remind people what music feels like. I run a foundation that could make that happen, if you'd be willing." He hesitated, the weight of her offer settling over him. "It's been a long time since I thought about doing that. My life's different now." "Different," she countered gently, but not over. "You have something worth sharing, Daniel. Something your daughter should see you fight for." Her words lingered in the air. He thought of Sophie's smile earlier, the way her eyes had lit up at his playing. She'd never seen him like that before, not just her dad, but an artist. By the end of the evening, Daniel agreed to meet with Caroline's team. In the weeks that followed, he began performing at small community events, then at schools, even at a veterans center. Everywhere he played, he saw the same spark, the quiet moments when someone's posture softened, their eyes closed, and the music reached a part of them nothing else could. For Daniel, it wasn't about reclaiming the life he'd lost. It was about building a new one note by note, where music didn't just belong to him, but to everyone who needed it. As Daniel's calendar filled with performances and teaching sessions, his path began to intertwine more closely with Caroline's. What started as professional collaboration slowly unfolded into a quiet companionship. After events, they'd linger in empty halls, sharing stories that didn't make it into polite conversation about the mistakes they'd made, the people they'd lost, and the dreams they'd shelved when life demanded something else. One rainy evening, Caroline invited Daniel to see a project she'd been working on in secret. She drove him across town to an old stone chapel that had been long abandoned. The stained glass windows were dusty but intact, the pews worn smooth from decades of use. At the front stood a grand piano, its surface gleaming under the soft glow of newly installed lights. "I bought the place last year," Caroline explained, her voice carrying both pride and vulnerability. "I've been restoring it. Thought it could be a space for music, for teaching, for people who need somewhere to feel safe." Daniel walked slowly to the piano, running his fingers over the polished wood. "It's beautiful," he said quietly, imagining Sophie here, her small hands exploring the keys, filling the air with unshaped melodies. Caroline stepped closer. "It's yours if you want it. Not to own, but to use. Teach here. Play here. Make it a place where music lives again." He looked at her, the weight of the offer settling in. "You're serious?" "I don't do things halfway," she replied with a small smile. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a vision forming, clear, steady, and possible. This wasn't just about him returning to music. It was about creating a home for it, a place where others could find the same solace and strength he had once lost. And standing there with the rain tapping gently against the stained glass, he realized that maybe this was what healing looked like. The chapel quickly became more than just a building. It became the heartbeat of Daniel's new life. Within weeks, its once silent walls echoed with laughter, hesitant scales, and the slow, patient rhythms of practice. Sophie claimed the first student slot every Saturday morning, her small fingers stretching across the keys, while Daniel guided her with gentle corrections and proud smiles. Word spread through the neighborhood. Retired veterans came for free lessons. Parents brought children who had never touched an instrument, and even teenagers, skeptical at first, found themselves drawn to the warmth of the space. Carolyn often stopped by between board meetings, sometimes just to sit in a back pew and listen. She never interfered, but her presence was a quiet anchor, a reminder that this dream was shared. One afternoon, after Sophie finished a simple but heartfelt rendition of Clair de Lune, she turned to address the small crowd gathered for the chapel's first community recital. Her voice trembled slightly at first, but her words were clear. "My dad taught me that just because something hurts doesn't mean you stop making music. It just means you play a different song." Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat as the audience applauded, not just for Sophie, but for the truth in her words. She had seen him at his lowest avoiding the piano, avoiding himself, and now she saw him here, giving not just notes, but pieces of himself to anyone who needed them. As the evening ended and the last guest left with a smile, Daniel sat alone at the piano. The chapel was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence it once held. This was a silence full of promise of stories yet to be told. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving, he was living. And the music, like the people it touched, was here to stay. On a crisp winter evening, Daniel sat at the chapel's piano, long after the last student had gone. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wood polish and candle wax from the recital earlier that day. Sophie padded in quietly, still wearing her red scarf from the walk home. She climbed onto the bench beside him and rested her head against his arm. "Do you think the music will always be here?" she asked softly. Daniel looked around the warm, dimly lit room. "As long as someone keeps playing," he said. "And as long as we remember why we started." She smiled, her eyes half closed. "Then we'll never stop." They sat in comfortable silence, letting the quiet become part of the melody, as Daniel's fingers found a gentle tune. The chapel, once abandoned and forgotten, now felt like a living thing, built not just of stone and wood, but of trust, resilience, and love. In life, we often bury our gifts when pain makes them too heavy to carry. But healing isn't about forgetting the hurt, it's about finding a way to use it to create something beautiful. The very thing you think is broken beyond repair may become the bridge that helps others cross their own struggles. If Daniel's story moved you, if it reminded you of a passion you once set aside, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us, what's the music in your life that's waiting to be played again? And if you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of our strength, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our growing community. Your story might be the next one that inspires someone else to keep going.